Howdy Hive Scum, and welcome to my first Less is More painting tutorial of 2026. I've been really excited to paint up these miniatures since Games Workshop sent these to my doorstep. I have the new Kill Team box set with the Chaos Raptors and the Adepta Sororitas sisters in there, and I've been busy making videos on all of the content in this box set. Now, I don't normally play Kill Team or even 40k, and I haven't painted a Chaos Space Marine in this way for a very, very long time indeed. But it's not about the miniature we're painting, it's about the philosophy and the processes that I'm showing you here today. The whole idea behind this series is that I create impactful and grimdark miniatures using a very less is more approach, which means limited palette, limited effort, but overall really punchy and really good looking miniatures on your table. So let's get straight into it. Now here's a little trick that I've been doing for quite a while now. Before I prime my miniatures, I actually tend to target areas of a miniature with a bit of extra texture. The reason for this is I find that Games Workshop plastics, even though that they're very detailed, a lot of Games Workshop plastics can be too smooth and a bit too sort of, I don't know, too new looking really. So adding a little bit of grit, in this case with Typhus Corrosion, before I put my prime on, adds just a nice little extra bit of crunchy, dirty, grimy stuff in the crevices of our miniature. Now I tend to do this on fabrics, I will always do it on armor and weapons, and the thing is here, you don't want to go over any detail that is important to the miniature. Again, the philosophy here is that we're not going to paint every single rivet and belt buckle on this thing. We are really keeping the key details nice and clean, but muddying up and dirtying the rest of it so that we get that grimdark feel. Now the whole aim of this series is to create really, really good looking miniatures that fulfill the grimdark criteria with using a very limited palette and a limited amount of different paints and tools and hobby supplies. This should be something that everybody out there can achieve no matter how long you've been painting. So with our miniature primed completely black, we're going to go with a sponging. Now what I'm going to use here is a makeup sponge, a very small makeup sponge dipped in a little bit of water to smooth things out a little bit, dried off a touch, and then I'm going to mix a little bit of Sycorax bronze in with some Rattling Grime contrast paint. And what this is going to create is a sort of very, very bright copper with a slight brownish tinge, which ties into the rest of the miniature later on. This is going to be the bulk of the work that you need to do on this miniature. Everything else past this point is even easier. Now you don't need to add any water to this because the contrast paint is already quite watered down anyway, so it does make this mixture the right consistency to apply with the sponge already. So very roughly and liberally, I'm going to hit the entire miniature with about 2 coats with the sponge, dipping it into this bronzy sort of copper mixture here. Now the aim here is to create really, really stark contrast between the highlights and the shadows on this miniature. I want the shadows to be completely black, and I want the highlights to be this bright copper color. I'm going to cover the entirety of the armor with this, making sure that I don't go into any of the deeper recesses where it should be black. I'm then going to go straight in with some Sycorax bronze just as a sort of spot highlight. I'm using a stippling motion with a brush that is completely knackered with short bristles on it. I'm just going to touch some of the sort of most highest highlights on the miniature as a sort of pre-highlight for the next step. Then I'm going to reach into my Army Painter John Blanche set and pull out the nice metal in here, which is known as heavy metal. This is just for the axe and some of the details on the jump pack as well. Now that is all of your base coats. The next step is to go into the entire miniature with 2 massive coats of contrast Rattling Grime. Now Rattling Grime is an awesome, awesome color and definitely one of my favorite paints in the entire Citadel range. It is a great paint. If you don't own it, go out and get yourself one. It basically is a sort of greeny brown contrast paint, and it is just a beautiful, beautiful color, specifically over metals, I find. Now remember, we actually mixed some of this into that brassy color at the beginning, so we've already got hints of this Rattling Grime in there. However, now we are just going to slap this over the entire armor on this miniature, and it's going to look wicked. I want to achieve the oily, grimdark look that the Iron Warriors are known for. Now you can see already, just with one coat, how much darker this miniature is, and I want to make it even darker than this. Yes, I know it's a little bit crazy, but we're going to go absolutely as dark as we can possibly go and cover the entire miniature in another layer of neat rattling grime. Okay, that's more like it. Oily, grimdark filthiness. Part of the reason why I've never been a huge fan of the Iron Warriors is I think the chevrons are a little bit corny, honestly. I know people really love them, but I just think the yellow and black chevrons, the hazard stripes, can look a bit silly. However, what I did notice about this miniature, and this is part of my whole approach generally, is if you see a little detail that pops out that you can use in an interesting way, in this instance on the axe here, we actually have an inbuilt version of hazard stripes on the axe with the direction of the stripes on the axe. So what I'm going to do here is the only yellow on the miniature I'm going to use is a stippling motion of the yellow from the John Blanche set actually onto the axe and create a kind of version of the black and yellow hazard stripes that you typically get on your Iron Warriors without going absolutely crazy on the pauldrons or the leg or anything like that. Just a tiny little suggestion that this guy is in fact an Iron Warrior. All right, the yellow is applied. The next thing I'm going to do is break out my boy Corvus Black, one of the absolute best paints in the Citadel range. It's funny actually because this one seems to be quite divisive. People either love it or hate it. I absolutely love Corvus Black. It is basically a very dark turquoise, and it works really well with bronzes and brasses and stuff as well. And it's just a really great highlight for just flat black as well. If you've got Chaos Black and you want to highlight it up, don't use anything but Corvus Black. It will help you out. It's awesome, especially if you add texture to it and do it with a stippling motion. Now, what we're going to use this for is, of course, covering over the yellow on the axe that it's spilt onto the stripes. And we're also going to do the shoulder pad as well and prep it for an Iron Warriors transfer. To paint the flesh on the head here, I have done Ungor flesh, which is another Citadel paint. Over the top of that, we have then mixed in some ivory from Army Painter as well and just highlighted it up once or twice just to get a nice bit of bright contrast on the head here. We want the head to pop because it is a focal point on a very dark miniature. The axe and the head are the main things that stand out here. All right, next up we have the transfers. Now, I was always really hesitant of using transfers. I've always avoided it previously because the only way I knew how to use them was with water, and it always looked shiny and just a bit rubbish, really. So what I've done here is I've got two of the best products on the market to be able to put transfers on with, and that is Micro Set and Micro Sol. You need both of these to be able to achieve great results with transfers, and these are just flipping awesome. One of them is a binder. It basically makes the transfer adhere to the surface a lot better. The other one almost melts it into position and gets rid of that glossy sheen that you typically see on transfers before you even add any sort of varnish. Okay, so the way that we prep our transfer is to first use Micro Set. This is in the blue bottle. Don't get these two confused. The blue bottle is always number 1 and the red bottle is number 2. There is actually a small number 1, number 2 in the top left-hand corner of the label on these bottles as well, but always Micro Set and then Micro Sol. So what you do is you prep the area by putting some Micro Set on to the shoulder pad before we apply our transfer, which has been soaking in a small amount of water on a paper towel. Now, the thing with a lot of transfers as well, particularly if they're very detailed, they can get a little bit wrinkly. Now, what the Micro Set and Micro Sol does, specifically the Micro Sol, is it smooths out those wrinkles. I've no idea how, but it seems to stretch the transfer into position and lay it down smoothly. You need several layers to be able to achieve this, but it really is awesome. Now, it wouldn't be me if I left out any oil paints here, so we're going to make things even darker, even deeper, and even more grimy and gloomy and horrible. So, an oil wash next. Now, what I'm using here is a 50-50 mixture of a black and a burnt umber oil paint with some odorless mineral spirits. A fairly watery wash in this instance into every single recess on this miniature to make everything bind together and just look awesome. Be messy with this, it makes things a lot more fun. Coat the entire miniature in a nice thick grimy layer of this oil wash, and then we're going to hit it with some cotton buds dipped in a little bit of odorless mineral spirits. We're just going to roll those across the surface to remove any excess oil paint and clean up some of those higher, more pronounced areas, particularly the head and the shoulder pads here as well. With the oil paint nearly dry after a few hours, we're going to hit the head with some Carroburg Crimson just into the deepest recesses around the eye sockets, around the ears, if you can see them, and any sort of recesses of the head here. And I'm going to use my finger actually to smudge things and create a sort of mottled effect on the top of the head, which makes a sort of sickly looking old age pensioner kind of vibe. Now I can see you looking at this going, mate, it is far too dark. But that's for two reasons. Firstly, because you're used to looking at Games Workshop heavy metal style box art, which is unbelievably vivid and garish for me. And it's just not my taste, honestly. It's cool and it's well done, but it's just not my taste. And secondly, the vibe I'm going for here doesn't want to be colorful. I want to use very little in the way of color. I just want a very muted overall sort of almost monochromatic look in this instance with a tiny, tiny hint of color in this miniature. And again, it was all about simplicity and less is more. Now the next step, and something that is completely optional at this point, but I do feel gives this model a lot of character, is a spot highlight of a tiny, tiny bit of a spot highlight all over this miniature by dotting very bright silver and very bright copper. Now because the model is so dark, breaking it up a little bit with some very, very, very bright little pinpoints can really make a difference to the overall vibe of it. Runefang steel is just about the brightest steel that you can possibly get, and this is great for those absolutely most shiniest of highlights. So with a very small brush and some patience and holding my breath, because the older I get, the more my fingers and hands shake, I'm just going around and picking out some of the rivets and doing a little dot here and there of silver and the copper color on those areas I really feel will break things up a little bit. There we go, and that is basically finished. I'm calling it there. Again, we don't want to overcook things. We want to know where to stop, and this is exactly where I want to stop. I could go crazy and do a bunch of edge highlights, but honestly, I prefer it this way. It looks better this way to me. It looks more realistic, looks more grimdark, and I just prefer the vibe that we've got going on here, especially once we move on to basing this guy. And again, the same philosophy for the base here. Less is more. We're going for very, very simple. I'm only using two products on the base, and they are both pigment powders. Now it's worth mentioning, before I use my pigments on the base here, I did spray the miniature with some Winsor & Newton matte varnish. This stuff is amazing, even on shiny stuff, because it just makes everything look really solid and finished, if you ask me. I feel like sometimes oil in the recesses can look a bit shiny, so in this instance the matte varnish just neutralizes all of that, unifies everything together, and of course protects your miniature, most importantly for the tabletop. So onto our base here. This is a really simple process as well. Using an old brush, I'm going to coat and stipple an awful lot of a bright orange pigment onto the base here in a very rough motion. I'm going to cover the entire thing as much as I can, and then we're going to go in with a second color and do some sort of spot highlights almost with the pigment in a yellow color. Something I get asked a lot about is whether you should bind your pigments at all. A lot of people use special pigment binders. I find they're a bit of a gimmick and a bit of a rip-off generally, and I don't use them. You could use a varnish over the top of the pigment, but the problem with that is it dulls the effect generally. I tend to just leave my pigments as is. Now, how do you stop it sort of coming off the miniature onto your hands, into your cases and things like that? Well, the answer is you kind of don't, but it's not too much of a problem as long as you get a hairdryer or a sort of a fluffy brush and just wipe off the excess to a degree where you know that it's not going to sort of taint other miniatures that it's hanging around. In my case though, all of my miniatures have this kind of vibe, they have this kind of base, so even if I do get some onto my terrain or scenery or onto my other miniatures, it's absolutely fine. I'm not going to bother about it. But if you're someone that really is very not wanting to contaminate anything, then absolutely invest in some sort of pigment binder, but I can't give you an opinion on how good they are because I just don't use them. Okay, so that's the orange. The next thing I'm going to do is add a couple of spots of yellow on top of this for some ultra high contrast, awesome looking rusty dusty bases. Now against the dark miniature with the very light orange base, we've got a really, really nice contrasting effect here, and I'm really happy with the way that this Iron Warrior turned out. Lastly, we break out some Chaos Black and we do the rim of the base to tie everything together and make this miniature finished for the tabletop. So there you have it, my philosophical less is more approach to painting Warhammer miniatures. I hope you enjoyed this video and it's given you the confidence to perhaps not think about stuff too much and just let go and be a little bit more artistic and expressive with it. And also, you don't have to put in that much effort. Anybody can achieve this using the steps that I've shown you here. It really isn't rocket science, and I tell you what, it's a lot more fun too, and it just looks wicked. So I'd love to know what you think. Do you prefer this way of painting? Is it freeing? Is it liberating for you? Or do you think it looks like trash? You might do, and that's absolutely fine. But I can tell you, I've been painting for 35 years, and I definitely prefer this way of painting nowadays. And especially as I'm getting older, because my hands are getting more shaky, my eyes aren't working as much, and I want to play games. I want to play more games than I do paint, but when I paint, I want to enjoy it most importantly, and this I really enjoyed, and I hope you did too. Anyway, I'll be back with another video really soon. The next one is going to be a Night Lord. Peace out.